We take a look at the future of democracy, a new global index showing that Israel has fallen out of the liberal democracy category for the first time in more than 50 years. It's now being classed as an electoral democracy. So why is that? Well, the report published by VDEM, a leading global index, says it's because of the government's efforts to pass the contentious judicial overhaul last year. The report says this is mainly due to substantial declines in the indicators measuring the transparency and predictability of the law and government attacks on the judiciary. So for more, we now welcome to studio international affairs analyst Dan Perry, the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press. From Jerusalem, Amir Weitmann, head of the Libertarian Caucus in the Likud party, and still with us in studio, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for being here. Now, it's worth noting, of course, that the judicial overhaul has largely been parked since the war started on the 7th of October. Nonetheless, we're looking at the impact of the reform efforts and protests and how worrying this is for the future. So I'm going to start with you, Dan. This change in category, to start, the definition, why it's important, your reaction.
Well, first of all, I think it's wrong. They indeed did this because of a reform that has been stalled and probably, I think, for the near future will not recur. But the word liberal may confuse American viewers because it's thought to be far left in the U.S. Classic liberalism is a centrist philosophy that basically sanctifies individual rights, the rule of law, separation of the branches, and so forth. All the real democracies that we're used to thinking of as real democracies are, in fact, liberal democracies. Right. Because they have individual freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of worship, freedom from torture, that are guaranteed against the will of the majority, basically. An electoral democracy is one where the majority can do a lot, and in some cases anything they want. In moving Israel from the liberal democracy category to electoral democracy, it moved from the category where Germany resides, the US resides, France resides, to one where Jamaica resides, Portugal resides, Trinidad resides. It is not a show of faith in Israel's democracy. It is absolutely accurate in terms of what the government had tried to do here. No doubt about it. They were going to appoint the judges, they're going to overrule the judges, they were going to allow the parliament to ban opposition parties. It was clearly an electoral democracy at best, if not en route to an authoritarian democracy, but it was stopped by the protest, by international outrage, and really by the Hamas massacre, which basically changed Israel's focus and a government's focus. So I have to say, in not adjusting to this, and 5 months later, acting as if the government had passed the reform, is a very odd thing for VDEM to do. And VDEM is respected. Their index is more complex, more granular than Freedom House and some others. So basically, I think they're wrong. On the other hand, it must also be said that if VDEM wanted to be anti-Israel, and that's what's happening here, they could have classified Israel as a non-democracy going back 50 years because of what's happening in the West Bank. Israel basically is being treated as Israel proper, nothing to do with the West Bank or Gaza.
Stay with us. I want to hear more from Amir and bring you in because as we're talking about these categories, Israel no longer falling in that group of liberal democracy for the first time in more than 50 years. Your take, how worrying is it? Is it worrying at all?
Well, no, the truth is that Dan Perry is right. Whatever you think about the reform, well, it didn't pass, so what happened? So I think clearly, and again, independently of what you think about the issues themselves, nothing happened in reality. So it's a bit, it's wrong, it's really ludicrous. One thing I disagree with Dan is that is about the respectability of the VDEM and all and number of other organizations. Like really, these organizations have got an agenda. Their agenda is the same sort of agenda that you can find among I would say some sort of a certain type of global elites, which you find in Israel and you find them pretty much everywhere in the world, certainly in the Western world. Now, these elites, and again, I'm a libertarian. I strongly believe, just to be clear, I do not disagree with Dan, what he said in principle about individual freedoms and rule of law. I fully agree with him. This is what characterizes, liberal democracy. Just to make clear, there's no difference in principle in terms of ideology. Just to be clear, but these sort of people believe that if you agree with them, then you are on the side of liberal democracy, and if you disagree with them on issues such as electing judges, then you are not on the side of democracy. This is dangerous and ludicrous, and this is actually anti-democratic. Now, I grew up in Switzerland. For instance, in Switzerland, every single judge is elected by the parliament at all levels, from the municipal and local level to the federal level, and only by political parties. Only by political parties. And more than that, if you don't belong to a political party, you cannot be elected and be a judge in Switzerland. Right now, nobody in his right mind would say that Switzerland is not a liberal democracy. So how do you reconcile that? So
because
the truth is, again, BDEM and all these other organizations have got a clear political agenda.
Right.
If you agree with them, then they will characterize you as being on the liberal democracy. And if not, no. This is dangerous for democracy.
Amir, I'm going to get a response now from Dan to what you're saying. Dan is going to respond.
There are a number of countries where the selection of a judge is politicized. By the way, that includes the United States. Nonetheless, those countries have the freedoms to do with liberal democracy enshrined in constitutions, and they have a strong separation of the branches. As for VDEM, I have to say, they're extremely well respected. There's no doubt they prefer liberal democracies because their order is liberal democracy first, and then elected, then authoritarian democracy, and then non-democracy. But they're very well respected. Their indexes are used by U.S. aid and the World Bank. And the implication is that if this unfair ranking of Israel currently as an electoral democracy, not a liberal one, stands, that will probably go hand in hand with a further diminution of Israel's standing in global financial markets and credit ratings and so forth. And it is part and parcel of the price Israel will pay if it indeed ceases to be a liberal democracy, as I think my friend Amir probably underestimates the degree to which Israel had approached that under the so-called reform. But I have to underscore, Amir, please, I have to underscore, Israel right now, within the 67 boundaries, not the West Bank, remains a classic liberal democracy, and a quite impressive one, and a dynamic one. We couldn't be having this conversation with the freedom that we are if it were not. So basically, VDEM is wrong, and I think on that issue, Amir and I can agree.
Well, at least you agree on that issue, but I know you want to respond. Amir, tell us more.
No, I just want to make clear that it's important for me to actually frame correctly this discussion. I think that Dan and myself are in 100% agreement about the importance of individual freedom and the rule of law. There is no difference between what his position in principle in ideologically speaking, where he stands and where I am. We agree. Okay?
Eitan Dangot, I want to get him to get a comment as well. So briefly, please, 30 seconds, please, Amir, 30 seconds.
Yeah, just that I think it's very dangerous. What happened last year, and we already had once a discussion, but what happened last year was very dangerous, because what happened is that it's not only that, this whole political camp refuses to admit that if I have a different opinion on
Amir, I don't think that's true, and I just can't let that stand.
I'm against the liberal democracy.
It isn't true. It isn't true.
30 seconds, Dan.
What is absolutely true is in most countries in the world, including in Israel, most people think of democracy as rule of the majority. They have to take aboard the fact that a majority can choose to nationalize their house, and it's only the courts and the so-called elites that can prevent such a thing. And I think at the end of the day, true liberal democracy of a kind that would have been undermined by the reforms last year does have majority support.
Eitan Dangot, you get the parting shot.
First of all, there is a lot of things to study and to discuss, but 3 points. First, Israel has a lack with constitution.
Yes.
Without it, you cannot go to such a step as it was here a year ago. Secondly, the situation in Israel is not prepared for it because it brings to a lot of damage to what we call the minority that has no freedom, and you cannot live such a way. The third is we are now in a war. There is no direct contact, but I think that the outside circle for what happened inside Israel has a very clear meaning to what we faced here with the big mistake of the present government on their activities in the last year.
Absolutely.
Eitan Dangot, Dan Perry in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Amir Weitmann in Jerusalem.